Hey everyone. So, like everyone else, I've just finished watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and I had some thoughts about it, about some of the things that I thought that it did good, and some of the stuff that I think it did bad. I'll start off with the positives because I do think there's something to get from this documentary, this dramatization. The film itself has some really good points about how the algorithm works and how technology essentially has a power over us and interests that we maybe not are always cognizant about. There are also all of these tech experts involved in the documentary who are interviewed, and a lot of them seem very competent about what they do and have a lot of experience with tech, so they probably know infinitely more about this subject than I do. A lot of them also seem to be keen on criticizing the effects of a capitalist system and how profit incentives are is one of the main root problems that even creates this system to begin with, the monetization of our attention as individuals in society. But this is also where some of the film's very critical flaws begin to air themselves. This is a film that is very clearly trying to be bipartisan in the way that it seems to try to reach across the aisle. This manifests in a lot of ways. For example, it has a lot of quotes from people like Tucker Carlson, and Marco Rubio is also brought in at the end of the movie to be, and they are used as appeals to like common sense in some way, which is quite worrying because both of these figures have very not healthy things to say about our democracy. One of the more overt things that the movie does is also that it uses clips of political extremism that has been prominent in the media over the last few years. It uses clips from the Christchurch shooting. It uses clips from Charlottesville, where the murderous neo-Nazi ran over Heather Heyer. And if you're noticing a trend between these two examples, it's that they're both examples of right-wing extremism, but the way that they talk about how the algorithm divides us and encourages extremism is that it's a bipartisan issue. That in some way the film suggests that Democrats or leftists are as much to blame for the division and extremism that is seen in the media, and it's almost kind of absurd because the movie is quite clearly cognizant of the fact that a lot of these examples are right-wing extremism and have nothing to do with either the Democrats or left-wing people in general. This kind of equivocation also results in the fact that the movie can't really criticize the Republicans more than it criticizes the Democrats, only in subtle ways, where it, for example, brings up the fact that we need to believe in climate change as one of these basic truths to keep our to keep a common reality for all of us, which is of course something that the majority of the Republican Party has a problem with and not the Democratic Party. But they still have to frame it in a way where it's like, none of the sides are really more right or more wrong. Instead, they're both wrong, and the division is the problem, not the certain beliefs that are being spread by certain people. And this is very dangerous, if you ask me. This also brings up the fact that it has the problem of creating a false dichotomy, which is where you put up an issue and say that there are only either two ways of viewing it or two solutions or only two problems. And this is, of course, a very unique American problem because in the US there are only two political parties. There are others, but they don't have any significant political power compared to the Democrats and the Republicans. And you don't really see this in the same way in, for example, European countries because we have more political parties. So you can't really just say that it's A versus B. You have to consider that there are more perspectives than A or B. And therefore, I called it a uniquely American problem, that you can create this false dichotomy where both sides are just as bad as the other in some way or another. One of the less overt ways that I also think that the film has some problematic opinions, or at least how it frames the opinions of the experts in the movie, is perhaps a better way to frame it, is when they are describing the flaws of what is essentially the capitalist system. Yeah, one of the theorists even talks about how trees are worth more when they're dead, when whales are worth more than when they are dead, and companies know this, so they will keep killing trees and killing whales. And he even uses the phrase that this theory is still believed. And a part of me wants to believe that he has been cut out of context, and at some point he has used the phrase the theory of capitalism earlier in that sentence, but that was too overtly political for the film creators. So they had to phrase that in a more vague way. So it can be construed as not being about capitalism specifically, but more about how society at large or the status quo is problematic. But at the same time, the movie kind of wants to find a status quo and overcome political divisiveness, as it puts it. It's actually very confusing when you try to hold all of these views together in the movie, because it is essentially saying that right-wing conspiracy theorists are wrong, but they aren't necessarily right-wing, and capitalism and profit incentive is a bad thing, but also profit incentive can be used in a way that it is not necessarily a bad thing. So in some ways the movie has some interesting points about how algorithms are very powerful, and we don't always necessarily comprehend how powerful they are and how much they actually dictate our consumption of content online. But at the same time, the movie doesn't seem like it wants to reconcile which interests are at the heart of this problem and how they manifest politically, and which political parties this is mostly a problem for. And of course, talking about it as if it's just a Republican problem is not correct either, because the Democrats are also under a huge profit incentives. They are also in the pockets of massive corporations. But saying that, it should of course be understood that one of these parties is doing more to be under the foot of corporate interests, and wings of the other party are doing things to actually get out of these interests. I'm of course thinking about groups like the Democratic Socialists of America and the Justice Democrats, such as AOC and Ilhan Omar and people like them. Not that they are perfect, they are still social democrats at best, but at least they are doing some things to, first of all, criticize the system, and second of all, try to better people's lives. And at this present time, that's more important than upholding some kind of leftist purity politics. But anyway, that was my thoughts about the social dilemma. So yeah, have a nice evening.